Good morning, it's Monday, the 16th of February. I'm Maret Gwyn, and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up, the US calls on Europe to save the West, but Europeans are not convinced. In his landmark speech at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the US and Europe are intertwined, but alignment is necessary, from the economy to culture. Meanwhile, Rubio is set to meet Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán in Budapest later today, after meeting Slovakia's Robert Fico on Sunday. Now, to debrief that speech and more from the Munich Security Conference, I'm joined by our EU editor, Maria Tareo, who's just back from Munich. First, good morning, Maria.
Great to see you.
It seems like the initial reaction to this Rubio speech was a sense of relief. But was there really relief in Munich?
Look, I think that's a great observation. It really captures the spirit of the past 3 days. Yes, that speech was more polite. It was certainly more diplomatic. There was this fundamental message of we share a history and the destinies that are intertwined, both the United States and the Europe and the European Union to some extent. But then he also suggested there needs to be this form of alignment that goes from the economy to trade, cultural, even spiritually. So yes, America can work with Europe, but it's a version of Europe that needs to be in alignment with the views of the US to a large degree. With officials that I spoke, they said, look, there was relief because compared to last year, J.D. Vance, that was a wrecking ball. This year was much polite to that extent, but the structure that we've seen before from the US government, that US National Security Review, which talked about civilizational erasure, all of those points from saying we're in a sort of climate cult, the idea of wokeness, mass migration. This is not a minor issue. Marco Rubio told the Munich Security Conference, all of that was present there. At the same time, then you had the Europeans. Emmanuel Macron talked about this idea of a Europe that has been vilified and caricatured. The Chancellor Merz, who said at this point the leadership of the U.S. is being contested. It is not clear that the U.S. will lead the world. And then, of course, Kaja Kallas, I was at a panel with her. I should note, Kaja Kallas had a bit of a revival over the weekend because she was pushing back. She was really the voice that said there's a number of things that we cannot agree. It's important that our destinies are intertwined, sure, but there are things we clearly don't see eye to eye. So she was very vocal to that extent. And there was a moment also in this panel, which hopefully we can put up on the screen. And I want to read to you. This was to obviously questions that we put about the sense of relief and the response to the Marco Rubio speech. And she said, contrary to what some may say, this woke, decadent Europe is not facing civilizational erasure. In fact, people still want to join our club and the waiting list is long. It took 3 months for a European voice to finally say there is no civilizational erasure in Europe. One of the quotes that I get and one of the senses that I get from this conference, this is really the takeaway that I get from it, is that there are two competing versions now of the West. Who leads it, what the values of this West are, and also who's going to be the face of it. And at this point, I'm not really sure that they are fully aligned.
Briefly, Maria, on Zelensky, he was there. Ukraine had a big delegation at Munich. What did he achieve?
Look, what did he achieve? This was a difficult Munich Security Conference for President Zelensky because, again, Ukraine, perhaps because of this confusion and commotion around the U.S. and Europe, was not as dominant. And I've been to every edition as the past 3 years. He did say, however, we want to get the ceasefire, but it needs to happen before even we can go into serious negotiations. We need to see this form of ceasefire. And he also said, before we commit to a peace plan, we need to get those security guarantees. There was a question I put to him about EU membership, and he also said we have to be technically ready by 2027 because that is also a security guarantee. Let's take a look.
Our membership in EU is the sort part of security guarantees. So we need it. This is the package for us. One doesn't work with another because it's economical security guarantees. With all respect to the United States and Europe. But if we will not have the date in the document, I think that Russia will block our membership in future. And it will be the problem for all of us because they will use some other countries or by themselves because they don't want us to be in EU.
And that was, of course, the Ukrainian president. Two things are obvious at this point. One is they really want this date. They want to get it in a peace settlement, and the European Union is going to have to get very creative to this. But the two are increasingly intertwined. This peace deal and this date, they have become now one.
Maria, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on everything from the Munich Security Conference. And to discuss all of this further, I'm glad to say we're joined now by Fabrice Potier, the CEO of Rasmussen Global, who previously also served as Director of Policy Planning for the NATO alliance. Sir, welcome. It's great to have you on the show this morning. Now, I'd like to get your take first on Rubio's Munich speech. Were you reassured when he spoke of an intertwined destiny for the US and Europe? Or does Europe still need to realize it cannot do it alone and needs a plan B for its security?
I would say it's probably both. There was clearly a feeling of calm before the next tempest, where obviously Rubio cast a tone that was much more friendly than the previous US speaker at the previous MSC, J.D. Vance, who really kind of opened almost hostility against Europe. However, I think nobody was naive in thinking that this is not an olive branch. This is just a way to make the past few months a bit less painful. But clearly the road ahead, as I mentioned, this is calm before the next tempest, because the road ahead is still made of many differences. I think Ukraine is still lurking very much around the corner in terms of big US-Europe Ukraine difference. And Greenland is not completely, in a way, solved. And I think the Danish Prime Minister was pretty clear about that.
And do you think Greenland could be the next storm? Because we heard from Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, over the weekend suggesting Donald Trump is still very serious about buying the island. Do you agree with her that there's still a big risk there for the NATO alliance?
But clearly, the problem is there's a mismatch between what the Danes, the Europeans are trying to do, which is to improve support to Greenland, both on the security and the economic front, which is a rational way of addressing possible vulnerabilities out there. And the US president who just takes a very emotional, personal view that he just wants to own that piece of estate. He's thinking like a Manhattan real estate mogul, so he doesn't take a very rational approach to it, and that's the mismatch that I think the Danes are trying to manage with a diplomatic process. How long the diplomatic process is going to keep things together, this is the big question mark. I think we have to be ready for the next crisis, and clearly the show of unity by the Europeans in addressing the US threat on Greenland worked once and may have to work another time, but we'll have to be willing to put even more skin in this game.
You obviously shaped NATO policy for many years. Do you think there's a real crisis within the HQ here in Brussels? You know, we heard EU leaders, von der Leyen, talking about reactivating the EU's own defence clause over the weekend, seemingly because they cannot rely on NATO's Article 5. Is the NATO alliance, as we've known it for decades, now dead? It's gone.
Well, I think it's not reactivating the EU mutual defence clause, it's making it real as a start, because it's never been taken really seriously. But on your NATO question, I think we are entering the age of parallel universes, where NATO is still going to be there. It's still very much a valid option for the Europeans, both in terms of US extended nuclear deterrent, but also in terms of framework to plan and prevent the next war against Russia. However, clearly what you hear in the corridors, but also in the main hallway, is that we need to start thinking about plan Bs. And for that, you're going to have the European Union, but you also are going to have increasingly the development of coalitions, like the coalition of the willing for Ukraine, which maybe is going to be put with more substance, or the joint expeditionary force that is led by the UK. So I think you're going to have the multiplication of all these plan Bs in response to the fact that, answering your question, I think the US has introduced a very significant doubt as to its commitment to Europe via NATO, and therefore NATO is still going to go on, but is no longer the one and only plan A.
Fabrice Pothier, that's all we have time for this morning, but thank you so much for coming on and joining us and sharing your insights. Now, as we mentioned there, the President of the European Commission said in Munich over the weekend that the EU needs to bring its own mutual defence clause to life, saying you change or you die. Our reporter Jakob Jannes has been scouring through the EU treaties in search of this little-known mutual defence clause.
Did you know the EU has its own mutual defense clause? Your reporter didn't. But suddenly, it is the hottest topic in Europe. Just days ago, the head of NATO told Europe to keep dreaming if they think they can defend themselves without the US. But the EU Commission President fired back.
Independent Europe just means let's develop our strength without constantly leaning on someone else.
And part of her plan involves a little-known rule, the Article 42.7. So, what is it? It says if an EU country is attacked, all the members have an obligation to help. And on paper, the wording seems to be stronger than NATO's famous Article 5. It doesn't even require a unanimous vote to activate. But there is a catch. The EU is not a military alliance, and it lacks a unified command structure. And it leaves it up to each country to decide how to help, which does not automatically mean sending troops. And in fact, it has only been triggered once, after the 2015 Paris attacks. Plus, there is a trust gap. When Eastern European nations look for a true security shield, they look to NATO, not Brussels. But with Washington demanding Europe to take over its own conventional defense, and with growing doubts around the future of NATO, the clock is ticking. The EU is also wondering what happens if the US closes its nuclear umbrella over Europe. And building a fully independent European nuclear shield would cost billions of euros and take time. So Europe has the treaty and the article. Now it just must build the military strength to back it up.
Jakob Jannes reporting there. Now, as we just heard, European leaders are reigniting the debate on a common European nuclear umbrella amid the continued threats from Russia and eroding trust in the US. Joining me in the studio to explain more is our defence reporter Alice Tidy, also freshly back from Munich for us.
Good morning.
Alice, lots of Europeans talking about this over the weekend, the need for a common, homegrown European nuclear deterrence. Why now?
Well, basically, the Europeans, although they've gone to great lengths over the past week to say that they believe that the US is fully committed to NATO, that they believe it is committed today, tomorrow, that it will be in 10 years, that it will be in 20 years, there's still a lot of concerns over that commitment. I mean, remember that last year, Washington cast doubt over its commitment to Article 5, so Europeans responded by more than doubling their spending target within the alliance. And yet this year we had Trump saying that he would forcefully seize Greenland. So that cast a lot of doubts over the very existence of NATO. And obviously the US has also said that he wants to pull back, but there's a lot of unsaid yet over how that partial pullback would happen and whether or not this could include the nuclear deterrent, right? So over the weekend, indeed, we had French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that he had held strategic dialogue with Chancellor Merz on this topic, as well as with other EU leaders. He didn't name those other EU leaders, but we know, for instance, that the Latvian PM, Evika Selina, said that she would be open to that discussion. We also had the Polish president yesterday telling Polish media that he wants his armed forces to look into the nuclear potential. And I also spoke with the Finnish defense minister, Antti Häkkänen, on the sidelines of the conference, who said, and I quote here, "Inside NATO, it's clear that the US is ironclad committed to nuclear deterrence. It's good news if the European nuclear states are investing to build up even stronger nuclear capabilities, but to compensate compensate the US, that's not the question now. So Finland would be open, but again, this European deterrent would have to complement the US and not compensate it.
So it's clearly an idea gaining traction among European leaders. But at the same time, Alice, it's still very, very divisive, this question of nuclear rearmament. And we heard from the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez clearly voicing some reservations about this.
Yes, indeed. Sánchez was at the Munich conference and he made it clear he is not for nuclear rearmament. In fact, he said that the nuclear deterrence is far too costly, far too risky, is far too risky way of avoiding conflict. And he said that what it involves, the risks it involves, are actually more of a gamble than a guarantee for European security.
Clearly still some divided opinions on that subject, but thank you so much for bringing us that update. Moving on now to something completely different. The Berlin Film Festival has only been running for a few days, yet already there is significant controversy over comments made by members of the jury. To explain, we can cross over now to Berlin, where our correspondent Laura Fleischmann is standing by for us, I believe. Laura, good morning. Bring us up to speed. What has been happening here?
Well, at first, everything seemed to go smoothly at the Berlinale, but then a German journalist asked a question at a press conference with the jury of the festival. He accused them of what he called selective solidarity only with Iranians and Ukrainians, but not with Palestinians. And one of the festival's jurors then responded that there are many conflicts going on worldwide that don't get any attention at the festival either. But what really sparked controversy was the response by Wim Wenders. He is the president of the jury and a very famous German filmmaker. He said that the festival is a counterweight to politics, and this even led an Indian writer to pull out from the festival altogether. But let's hear what Wim Wenders actually said at the press conference.
We have to stay out of politics because if we made movies that are dedicatedly political, we enter the field of politics, but we are the counterweight to politics. We are the opposite of politics. We have to do the work of people and not the work of politicians.
Yes, and Laura, it's also true to say that these film festivals, including the Berlinale, are usually highly political, very politically charged. Why the sudden change in tone here?
Indeed, the Berlinale is known as a highly political film festival, and it still is. There are many political statements being made on the red carpet, at press conferences, but the change in tone could be due to Germany's history, especially in regards to the Holocaust and in regards to World War II. Israel is a highly sensitive topic here in Germany, and this could be the reason why Wim Wenders is hesitant in regards to Palestine and in politics in general. But it could also be due to anti-Semitism being linked to some pro-Palestinian protests here in Germany. There are anti-Jewish chants, there are anti-Jewish and anti-Israel signs at some protests that aren't against the government but against the whole country's existence. So this could be a reason why movie makers and actors don't want to be linked to this topic perhaps. And also there has been a spike in anti-Semitism as of recently here in Germany. And the festival's director, Trisha Tuttle, even came out and supported Wim Wenders after the controversy. She said that it is, as of recently, oftentimes expected of movie makers and actors to make political statements, but they're mainly at the film festival to promote their work, their movies. They want to talk about what they did. They don't want to talk about politics, perhaps, and it is their right of free speech to talk about whatever they please. They can decide to not talk about politics, but and they can also decide to talk about them, but they get criticized either way. That's what Trisha Tuttle said after the controversy broke loose.
Laura, thank you so much for that update on the controversy surrounding the Berlinale Film Festival in Berlin. But that's it from us for today. We'll be back at the same time, same place tomorrow. In the meantime, if you want to read more about the stories we covered on today's show and all the other breaking news from Europe, remember to stay up to date on our website, Euronews.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon here on Euronews.